Welcome to the final episode of our podcast, Let's Talk About Sex. Over the last 4 sessions, we've looked at the data, the cultural silence in the Philippines, the reward circuits, and the impact of porn addiction on our real-world relationships. But today is the most important part of the journey, the solution. How do we actually change the behavior? Joining me for this final episode is Miss Sofia Leigh Sindac, a clinical psychologist specializing in behavior intervention. Miss Leigh, thank you for being here to help us close this out.
Let's talk about sex, baby.
Yes, thank you so much for having me, Isaac. It's very fitting that we're ending this last leg of the podcast on interventions. Most people feel like they're stuck in a loop that they can't control, but behavioral science tells us that if you change the environment, then the brain will eventually follow. So before we get into the how, let's first talk about the why. In the Philippines, we don't really have formal sex education, and that absence makes making interventions a lot harder for Filipinos, especially adolescents and young adults. Without formal sex education, pornography becomes the default teacher, and people don't realize that what they're watching is a performance and not a manual, not a tutorial. So the first step in our intervention is psychoeducation, which is exactly what we're doing right now. You have to first unlearn the scripts that the screen gives you. We have to acknowledge that in our culture, secrecy is the fuel. Breaking that secrecy, even if it's just with a therapist or a trusted friend, is the first effort toward behavioral shift. So at present, there's still an ongoing disagreement within the scientific community about the negative effects of problematic pornography use and, most importantly, genuine addiction to it. Now, I'm citing this from a journal article published by Fernandez and Griffiths in 2019. They say that the symptoms of excessive pornography use fit within the framework of addiction. Similar neurobiological mechanisms are in place when people are addicted to substances and other behaviors because of a disordered reward processing system driven by a cue reactivity mechanism. Now, what I mean to say is that the brain is basically training itself to crave that visual hit. Additionally, another journal by Sok and Son also highlights that in contrast to men without compulsive sexual behavior disorder or CSBD, those with CSBD exhibited more pronounced prefrontal cortex activity when responding to sexual cues. And this is a really powerful place to start because it takes out the shame factor to some extent. It's not that you're a bad person or that you're full of sins or that you're dirty. It's just that your neural hardware and circuitry are overwhelmed by these stimuli. Especially here in the Philippines, it's compounded by the fact that nobody really talks about it. By the time we realize that we've become dependent on pornography, our prefrontal cortex has already been severely fatigued.
I think we've gone over the briefers. Now, Miss Leigh, let's talk about the interventions. If the brain is reacting to these cues, then obviously we're going to have to eliminate these, right? Do you think digital boundaries are a great start?
Oh, absolutely. We call this part of the intervention stimulus control. The most common trigger for Filipinos and anyone in general who is addicted to porn is late night phone usage in bed. In line with this, I say we talk about friction. Addiction thrives on a path of least resistance. So if your phone is on your nightstand, then you've already lost the battle. So my first recommendation would be not to sleep next to your phone. The phone sleeps in the living room, the kitchen, or wherever you want it. I don't know, put it in a safe. It doesn't really matter. Or at the very least, put it across the room. You can also use sight blockers as well as the grayscale mode on your phone where it turns your screen black and white. The logic behind that is by stripping the color from your screen, you kind of make the visual stimulus less rewarding to the brain. Megan Mass, who is an assistant professor in human development and family studies at Michigan State University, recommends doing this to reduce your engagement. Most apps and sites, they use vibrant colors to trigger dopamine in our brains. So by turning your phone to grayscale in your accessibility settings, you kind of reduce the reward value of the image. You're making the screen kind of less appetizing to your brain's reward center. And I think that this is really so insightful. It's like if you turn the meal into gray, it just doesn't really hit the same way or it doesn't taste the same way. Now, it's a good point in time to address the why, which brings me to our second scientific point. Many people use pornography to cope with the stress of living in high pressure society like ours. However, the modern brain is simply just not evolved for the sheer volume of high speed digital dopamine that we have access to today. Studies suggest that our brains can actually unlearn pornography addiction because of neuroplasticity, but that it requires a process that involves replacement. So for this, we use a technique called urge surfing. Instead of trying to crush the urge, which usually makes the impact stronger, you kind of learn to ride it like a wave. You acknowledge that, oh, I am feeling the urge to scroll because I'm stressed about a deadline, something's going on at home, or I'm not satisfied with my partner. So you picture the urge as a wave rising, peaking, and eventually falling, and then remind yourself that the feeling is temporary and that it will pass. And after that, you breathe deeply to stay calm throughout the whole process. Actually, Lattimore in 2026 suggests that most urges last between 10 and 30 minutes, but if you don't reinforce them with fantasy or behavior, you can experience the urge without reacting, which gradually weakens its intensity. You can actually do a lot of other things like meditation, mindful journaling, walking meditation, and other mindfulness techniques or just breathing techniques. And in line with that, you can also have a planned substitution activity. It could just be 5 minutes of a specific workout that you enjoy, a hobby that requires your hands, or even just a cold shower. This way, you're actively teaching your brain that, oh, there's another way to regulate my emotions that really doesn't involve a screen and that doesn't involve me watching pornography. Now, going back to what I mentioned earlier about like therapy, psychotherapy, I think is 1,000% effective. In a study by Lopez Pinar and colleagues in 2025, psychotherapy was found to be significantly effective, improving participants with problematic pornographic use significantly more than control groups on three key outcomes. Number one, severity. Number two, frequency and duration. And lastly, sexual compulsivity. So the meta-analysis in this study examined multiple modalities, but it found strongest evidence supporting cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, and emotionally focused therapy, or EFT. So I think that it's really important to find a therapist who actually understands porn addiction. Ideally, someone who is a certified sex addiction therapist, or a CSAT, who understands the neuroscience and the shame cycle behind it. Still, as we mentioned in episode 2 of this podcast, in the Philippines, sex ed is, well, it's often non-existent in homes and schools, and that really points to a systemic failure. When we don't have sex education, we leave the youth to be educated by this multi-billion-dollar industry, and we all know that the porn industry is in the industry of entertainment and not education. So it creates this distorted intimacy that warps our expectations before we have real experience to compare against it. It distorts our body image, our sexual responses, the duration of our orgasms, and what partners really enjoy. Most importantly, let's not forget about the absence of consent in porn. I mean, there are so many patterns of troubling recurring themes in porn. You have physical aggression, especially against women, power imbalance, which features bosses and teachers, and the whole step family genre, which repackages incest taboos under a thin and really bad fictional narrative. And adding to that, there is outright, excuse me for the word, rape. There's also a tendency for the industry to put the youth aesthetic on a pedestal where being naive and being a child is sexualized. And so the issue, Isaac, is not just about these themes existing. It's the fact that for many young people, this is their first and primary exposure to sexuality. So if any of our listeners is a parent or a friend or a victim, how can they help someone they suspect is struggling with porn addiction? Firstly, we have to remove the judgment. If you approach someone with, oh, what you're doing is dirty, or what you're doing is disgusting, or that is a sin, then they will retreat into secrecy. And we all know that secrecy is where addiction thrives. So instead, you have to approach someone with a statement like, I notice you're not sleeping well. Is something bothering you? I noticed that you have been on your phone every single night and you seem as if you cannot stop. How can I help you? So you really have to approach it from a health perspective. So we have to remember that guilt and shame are relapse triggers, but self-compassion is an actual clinical tool. So if you slip up, you don't have to start at zero. You don't have to start from scratch. You simply look at the data. What triggered it? Was it a long day at work? Was I feeling lonely? Was I feeling stressed? So you adjust the boundary and you try again, because recovery isn't linear. It's a series of better choices that we have to make in order to reach our goal. But at the end of the day, it's also all about social support, talking about it through therapy and peer support groups to really take accountability of our actions. But none of these can be done if our system doesn't support it. So we must really champion sex education in the Philippines to prevent unsafe practices and teenage pregnancy, which compromises the lives of many youth. So if you think you are in a vulnerable position for Filipinos, there unfortunately aren't many well-known Philippines-based porn addiction groups because we have the stigma, but these are the most accessible and commonly used support groups or programs. Number one, we have Sex Addicts Anonymous. This is probably the most accessible option. Many Filipinos are known to join their online Zoom or telemeetings anonymously, and they focus on compulsive sexual behavior and pornography use. I have linked their website on the screen. And then we also have the Sex and Porn Addicts Anonymous, or SPAA. They're more specifically focused on pornography addiction and compulsive masturbation, and they mostly have online meetings. They have it 7 times a week. So there is literally a Zoom meeting every single day, and they use the 12 traditional steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, which has helped millions and millions of alcoholics reach sobriety. I've also, linked their website on the screen. And then lastly, we have Sexaholics Anonymous, or SA. They are more structured and, I guess, abstinence oriented. Some Filipinos use this, especially if they prefer stricter recovery frameworks. And I've also linked their website on the screen. So I believe that's it for my talk. Thank you so much for having me, Isaac, and it was a pleasure.
Miss Leigh, that is the perfect note to end on. We are all more than our habits, and with the right boundaries, we can harness genuine and actual intimate connections with the real world. Still, we call on our national leaders to help champion this initiative to make our society more proactive and aware of these problems that are never in the limelight. Thank you for being our final expert. Miss Leigh, that is the perfect note to end on. We are all more than our habits, and with the right boundaries, we can harness genuine and actual intimate connections with the real world. Still, we call on our national leaders to help champion this initiative to make our society more proactive and aware of these problems that are never in the limelight. Thank you for being our final expert.
Let's talk about sex, baby.